title attorney is not the sexiest thing in the world.
Hey.
Related real estate.
Speak for somebody else.
Learn about finding properties, finding money, stuff like that. But title is really important, and having the right title company is super important. Our companies use Universal Title a lot, and they're one of, they're a trusted resource for us, especially for creative deals. You can't just go to any title company for a real estate investment transaction. A lot of title companies just don't fully understand the creative strategies, and especially when you're doing something super creative. And from wholesalers out there, the ones that either want to double close or they want to do assignments. Amin is a great resource. So there you go. Do your thing. I'll get your.
All right. Thank you. I want to start by thanking Hard Money Bankers for putting this event together and having Billy and I here from Universal Title. Good evening, everyone. Josh touched based on this. A lot of times you find a property, you renovate it, you sell it. That's great. But there are times where you find a property and for different reasons, you just cannot do your traditional buy, renovate, and flip. What I mean by that is you might have too much money on the streets, your contractors are tied up with other stuff, you need quick cash. There are other alternatives to increase your investment portfolio without having to do your traditional buy, renovate, and flip. We're going to talk about two of those tonight, assignment wholesales and then double closings. As Jason said, that's not something that a lot of title companies do, and a lot of them, obviously the ones that do it, most of them don't do it that well. It does get hairy, it does get tricky, and you really need someone competent and experienced to handle this matter. First one we're going to talk about is assignment and wholesale. I just wrote down a quick definition for you guys. So there are essentially three parties in an assignment wholesale deal. You have the property owner, of course. You have yourself, if you were to become a wholesaler. At that point, your title would be assignor. And then the third person who will eventually get on title of the property, who will be assignee. Now, the relationship between these three parties is related to the contract that's going to be executed. So originally, or the first contract would be between the property owner and yourself. Say you go out, you find this deal, you think it's a great property, and you found the value that you think would be great for you on the profit end. Now, you have someone that you know that's struggling to find shells, find properties, investment properties. You know they're willing to pay you a lot more than what you just paid that person to acquire the contract to this property. So that's where the assignment comes in. You assign your right as someone who's already under contract with this property owner to the next person, who would be the assignee, the ultimate buyer. So what happens is, a lot of times, and it should be required in the contract, that the seller will also agree in writing for you to assign that interest over. So you can't just assign it over and all of a sudden introduce the two parties and be done and walk away. In a well-regulated, compliant contract, the seller will have knowledge of this third party, will execute an addendum to the contract or a whole new contract agreeing to sell this property to this new buyer. Now, you say, why would you do that? Well, the main reason would be quick profit. What happens is that for the difference of the value between what you contracted for with the homeowner versus what you're selling it for, that difference is your profit. Now, there are some folks that negotiate it differently. There are some wholesalers that promise a seller a net amount. They also, on the back end with the buyer, they'll say, I'll pay for half of the transfer and recordation fees out of my assignment fee. You can kind of formulate it however you want, but the traditional way would be to take that even number between the two and have that as your quick profit. One of the more attractive parts about it is there's no closing cost. You're not getting on title. You're simply a person that gets paid on the settlement sheet, and you have a line item on the settlement sheet. You're not paying transfer and recordation taxes. You're not obtaining title insurance. You're not paying for title search. So that's very attractive. There are very rare instances where you don't pay closing costs in real estate, and that's one of them. This is a very good reason. Property is no longer a good investment. A lot of times we forget when you guys go find that property, you're buying it as is. You have no clue what's going on. Sure, you may have a right of inspection, but there's no guarantee that anyone's going to fix those for you. So let's just say you find this property and you go in, you do your inspection with your contractor, and all of a sudden you realize there's a $10,000 to $15,000 matter that needs to be resolved, which you didn't budget for. But someone down the street who you've been working with, and as Josh said, you build a relationship with, who's also an investor, has a better contractor crew than you do, has better resources than you do. Maybe they can do the same thing for $7,500 that you have to do for $15,000. So now it becomes a good investment for them, and you still win because you can now assign the contract over to them for your assignment fee. They still get a property that they were looking for that's desirable for them, and they will eventually make a profit out of it as well in the back end when they sell the property. So those are 3 very good reasons why you would want an assignment or a wholesale. All right, so when can you assign a contract? For the most part, it's from the courthouse foreclosures. So there are folks that are always bidding at the courthouse steps, and they become probably one of the more valued wholesalers that you want to build a relationship with. My office is in Baltimore City. There are a ton of wholesalers at the Baltimore City courthouse steps every day bidding on properties. So wholesalers in foreclosure is very prevalent. Now, when I say foreclosure, I don't mean REO. I mean actual foreclosure. The properties being, can you guys hear me? Properties being sold at foreclosure. So the substitute trustee, who's actually the attorney representing the bank, is auctioning the property. You show up at the courthouse and you purchase the property, and later on you find another person to transfer the property to. Now, what will happen is that there will need to be a motion filed within the foreclosure case substituting the purchaser. And the judge will approve that, assuming no one objects, which the trustee is not going to object. And the judge will approve that, and now the new buyer will become the title holder and will transfer. And you still collect that fee on the settlement sheet, and you still net out that difference as your profit. Standard sale is also common. You find the property, you find the homeowner from door knocking or other means, and you transfer that property and the contract, and you assign it over. So a lot of times you want to have that conversation with the seller at some point, letting him know you're shopping the property around to other people, and that you may find a buyer for that property, and the property will be assigned. Assuming they're still getting what they wanted to get from selling the property, they should be fine with it. We'll discuss what happens next in double closings. But assuming they're fine with it, they'll sign that addendum to the contract or a whole new contract, and then they'll sell the property and still get what they're asking for up front. Some of the times that you cannot assign bank real estate owned, so REO deals. If you've ever bought a property through government or banks, they will not let you assign the contract. They're under binding contract with whoever the buyers that they accepted with their terms, and they're not willing to assign the contract over.
What about if you get like an LLC, and then you get on a contract with that LLC,
right,
and sell that LLC to
right.
somebody? Is that something that is legal to do?
So, gentleman asked, what if you get under contract by, let's just say, ABC LLC, and instead of transferring the contract to another buyer, you just sell the interest in ABC LLC? The issue with that is that comes into some part of a tax evasion under Maryland Code. You have to consider how much is the asset of the LLC and how much of that interest is being conveyed. There are very few times that that's capable of happening because it's not compliant with the code. If it's over 80% on $1 million, depends on the assets of the LLC. So it could work out, but a lot of times it's questionable, and you might not find a title company to handle that procedure for you. So bank owned, the reason why the banks do not want to do the assignment is because now they look at it as they're leaving money on the table. So they're not going to accept you signing it over to somebody else and you profiting some money that they could have had. So that's why they don't accept it. Also short sales, once they approve the short sale, it's a done deal. you cannot transfer it unless you get it reapproved, which if you've ever done a short sale, you know that's not a possibility. It's almost a nightmare to do so.
But,
Yes?
but with a short sale, does it have to be owner occupied? I mean, you can flip it, correct?
Yes. Yep. Short sales, and this is kind of getting, did everyone hear the question? So she asked, can you flip it if somebody's occupying the property in a short sale? That's,
No, I'm saying, no. Does it, when you buy the REO or the short sale, are you required to be an owner occupant, or can you flip it?
okay.
Can you rehab it?
Okay. So she asked, do you have to be an owner occupant when you go under contract for short sale or REO? Not necessarily. It just depends how you enter into the contract. There are benefits of being an owner occupant when you get into a short sale or REO transaction, but you don't necessarily have to be a homeowner occupant. One thing about REOs, once you get into an REO deal, especially with Fannie Mae, you can only borrow up to $120,000 on the settlement sheet against the property. So there's a restriction on how much you can borrow. As far as the short sales, a lot of banks have a restriction against flipping the house within the first 90 days. So you can't flip the house within 30 days at all. The first 90 days, you cannot sell it for 120% over the sales price. So you buy it for $100,000 in a short sale. Within 3 months of that, you can't sell it for anything above $120,000. That's a restriction that a lot of short sale banks have. And it carries with the deed, it transfers. So the next title company will see it, will not let you transfer. All right, double closings. Now, double closing is kind of an alternate to assignments because assignments are not always feasible. Now, we'll cover why, but what happens in a double closing, you essentially have two contracts. Where in the assignment, you have one contract, and it was between the property owner and the ultimate buyer, with the wholesaler in the middle collecting an assignment fee. With the double closing, you have two contracts. So you have the property owner engaging in a contract with would be you if you assume to do double closings, and then a contract between you as the wholesaler and investor with the end buyer. Now, that means two separate closings. So you would have to get to the table twice and handle two closings. And again, not a lot of title companies handle that for different reasons, complexity being the major one. So why would you do double closings? There's still profit in double closings. For the same reason assignments, where you have someone that as a buyer is willing to pay you more, you can also find the same kind of profit, maybe not as much, a little bit less, but in a double closing. Because the contract that you get on the back end is higher than the contract that you engage for on the purchase end. When assignment isn't an option, so when the seller doesn't allow you to assign the contract, or what happens mostly is the seller is completely uncomfortable with you selling the property for such a high amount. Let's just say you find a property, you promise an older lady $100,000 for her house she's been in for 50 years, and you find a buyer for $150,000 for that same house. And during the transaction, you realize she's not going to be happy to see a $50,000 line item going to you. At that point, an assignment is probably not the deal you want to do. A double closing is probably the deal that you want to do. So what happens is that you engage in that first contract for $100,000, and then you settle on that transaction, you come back to the table, and then you settle for $150,000 on the back end when you transfer the property away. Now, what are the disadvantages of a double closings? Obviously, double closings means double the fees and higher fees. So you have to pay for the title search, pay for the transfer and taxes, and then on the back end also do the same, pay nominal title fees as well as your transfer taxes. But also, this is where underwriting comes into play for title. Us and any other title company that hands a double closing will require you to have both transactions funded. at least the ones that do it the right way. So what I mean by that is you can't use that $150,000 the buyer is giving you to fund your first transaction. You have to come up with your $100,000, settle on the first deal, and go transfer the property out for $150,000 on the back end. So it does, the lending part of it, as well as having cash and capital, definitely comes into play. Yeah.
You can get transactional lenders.
There's a couple questions back here. Do you want to?
Sure. Yes.
So what about in the first transaction between A and B?
Yes.
The seller has a title company that they want used, but then you as the investor with your B and C transaction have, you or
Right.
somebody else. Is that a double closing? How does A and C know about each other?
Yeah, that's not a double closing in a sense that we're talking about it. And a lot of those sellers probably, well, one, you would have the right to choose your own title company anyways, as the buyer in the first transaction.
Okay.
So you can really regulate that first transaction regardless. It would be on the back end of it where you don't really have the legal choice, but you can certainly say that I've already done the transaction with this title company, they already have the title, and would you want to close with this title company to make the matter smoother and easier?
Well, you don't get out of that second fee, so why is it an advantage to use the same title company if you have to pay the closing twice anyway?
No, you do get out advantage of the title fees on the seller side, on the back end, because assuming that we already clear title on the front end, there shouldn't be any title curative fees or any of those miscellaneous fees on the back end. Whereas if you buy with one title company and sell with another, they might have to redo some of the stuff that's already been done. Right, so that's the advantage of keeping it within the same title company, assuming the buyer allows for
So
it.
as the wholesaler, you can say, I'm using X title company right from the start.
You can refer that, you can recommend it, but the buyer under Maryland law has the right to choose. So if they say no, then it's not going to happen that way. But a lot of the times buyers, once they understand there's a benefit of using a title company, once they look up the title company and reputation of the title company and they're comfortable, it's usually not an issue. They will pick the title company. But referral is all you can do. Yep. Someone else have a question?
Any other questions?
Any other questions? Yes.
I mean, maybe a dumb question being a new investor, but I was just curious is that if I want to, as an end buyer, which is the back end buyer, I would say, if I want to make sure is that what I'm buying from wholesaler is paying in, how do I make sure that? Is it my title company will make sure that, right?
Yes.
So okay, and if it is an assignment, the wholesaler is not in the lien at any time, right?
No. No, what the title company has to run title anyways, and you as a buyer, if you're doing the double closing and you're the B person, so you're in the middle, you can request title insurance. You don't necessarily have to, but you can request title insurance and have that transferred over to the buyer on a reissuance rate. But if you are the end buyer, so you say you're party C to the double closing, you definitely want title insurance. It's certainly recommended. Yep. Yes.
Just a personal question.
Sure.
Are you, do you do like, are you a attorney? Like, are you a real estate attorney outside of the title?
No. No, but we work with a lot of attorneys that are diversified in real estate, because real estate is a big field. So we have attorneys that handle foreclosures. We have attorneys that handle boundary disputes. We have attorneys that handle title claims. We also know a lot of estates and probate attorneys as well. So real estate gets involved with a lot of things, contract law, bankruptcy, a lot of different stuff. But we don't honestly have time for all of that, so we stay pretty busy with transactional law. Yes?
On transaction A, if you're doing it right, you're funding that transaction. What do you recommend, or how do you handle the lag time between recording that first transaction and the time it takes, particularly in a jurisdiction like Baltimore City,
Yeah.
before you can close on a second transaction?
It really depends. So are you assuming that we're doing both transactions?
Yeah, let's say you are.
Okay. Then if we are, it depends how close to you're closing them. So let's just say if you're closing within a day or two, then we keep it all together, we'll record at the same time. But if you're recording within, if you're closing within a week or longer, we get them on pretty fast. We get them on within 2 to 3 days. So we'll send the first one out, get a recording receipt, come back, and then we'll do the second one right after, about a week or so after.
Which might be an advantage to recommend using.
Correct.
title.
Correct, exactly, because the next title company will say, well, you know, I want all this stuff and it's not on the record, but we already know what we submitted to the record, so that's exactly right.